Hello, and welcome all to Movie Hunter, the show that tracks down the quality of all sorts of movies. My name is Hunter, and today in the 41st episode, our target is Iron Man 2, produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Paramount Pictures. After the success of Iron Man in 2008, Marvel began developing a sequel, and in July, Jon Favreau signed on to direct again. Justin Thorax was hired to write the script, having co-wrote 2008's Tropic Thunder, which starred Robert Downey Jr., who recommended Thorax. Emily Blunt was talked about for playing Black Widow, but was forced to turn down the role due to a previous agreement with 2010's Gulliver's Travels. The post-credit scene teasing the upcoming Thor movie was directed by Kenneth Branagh, the director of the Thor movie. The film was originally going to follow the Demon in the Bottle storyline from the comics, but ultimately strayed from the intended storyline, instead becoming minimized, partly out of fear of having an alcoholic Iron Man perceived negatively in marketing and affect merchandise sales. Another reason for it was various ad-libs on set, notably from Robert Downey Jr., that resulted in Thorax having to do quote-unquote writing gymnastics to have the story make sense. Prior to the film's release, Marvel Comics released a 4-issue miniseries comic book titled Iron Man vs. Whiplash, and a 3-issue prequel miniseries titled Iron Man 2: Public Identity. A video game called Iron Man 2 was released, which was written by Matt Fraction, who also wrote the Invincible Iron Man comic book series. The film released on May 7, 2010, and made $623.9 million on a budget of $170 to $200 million. Jon Favreau returned as the director, and the screenplay was by Justin Thorax. It was based on the character by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, Don Heck, and Jack Kirby. Kevin Feige returned as the producer, and Matthew Libatique returned as the cinematographer. Dan Lebentel returned as editor, alongside Richard Pearson. The music was written by John Debney. The returning cast includes Robert Downey Jr., Gwyneth Paltrow, Samuel L. Jackson, Jon Favreau, Clark Gregg, Leslie Bibb, Paul Bettany, and of course Stan Lee. The cast also includes Don Cheadle, replacing Terrence Howard, Scarlett Johansson, Sam Rockwell, Mickey Rourke, John Slattery, Gary Sandling, and Yevgeny Lazarev in his final film role before his death 6 years later in 2016. The film was nominated for 36 awards as listed by Wikipedia, of which it won 5 of. The film opens with a man named Ivan Vanko watching the news as Tony announces that he is Iron Man, as he creates a replica of Tony's miniature arc reactor. 6 months later, we see Tony defending himself in court over whether or not he should be allowed to own the Iron Man suit. The court brings in Justin Hammer, someone who Tony is not very fond of, who claims that other countries are developing similar weapons based on the Iron Man suit. Tony, however, hacks into the TV and demonstrates to everyone that other countries are actually far behind the technology, as well as show that Hammer himself has successfully failed in replicating the suit. Stark learns that the palladium core in his arc reactor is slowly poisoning him, and tests the other elements, only to find no suitable replacement. Accepting his impending death, he makes his assistant, Pepper Potts, the new CEO, and hires one Natalie Rushman to be her assistant. Tony attends a Grand Prix where he decides that at the last minute to compete, but he is confronted by Ivan Vanko as the Whiplash, and Pepper and Tony's bodyguard, Happy Hogan, are able to rush the suit to him, where he is able to defeat Vanko. Justin Hammer, also at the event and impressed with Vanko's skills, breaks him out of jail and fakes his death so that he can build armored suits that outclass Iron Man. At his birthday party, preparing for it to be his last, Tony wears the Iron Man suit and becomes drunk, where he puts everyone at the party in danger. Tony's friend Rhodes, who works for the US Air Force, comes over to put a stop to it, and is forced to don a suit in order to stop him, which he later flies off with. Nick Fury later meets up with Tony along with Natalie, who is revealed to actually be a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Natasha Romanoff. Nick Fury reveals that Tony's deceased father, Howard Stark, was actually a founding member of S.H.I.E.L.D. He also explains that Howard invented the arc reactor with Vanko's father, Anton Vanko, who tried to sell it, but Howard had him arrested when he tried to do so, hence why Vanko is now trying to enact revenge on Tony. Tony discovers that his father had discovered a new element, but due to the limited resources of his time, was unable to make it, and gave the blueprints to Tony, who makes it and is able to successfully use it as a replacement for the core in his arc reactor. Meanwhile, Vanko and Hammer get into a disagreement, at the end of which Vanko calls Tony to tell him that he is still alive. Tony then rushes to Hammer's presentation, where he shows off Vanko's suits led by Rhodes in the War Machine armor that has been equipped with guns. Vanko hacks the suit, including War Machine, to go after Iron Man, leading to a chase. Pepper gets Hammer arrested while Natasha and Happy Hogan go to Hammer's factory where they reboot War Machine. Iron Man and War Machine then fight off all the suits, and then Vanko appears in a new Whiplash suit and they defeat him too. Tony reclaims title of CEO of Stark Industries, and the film ends with Nick Fury telling Tony that he'll be a consultant at S.H.I.E.L.D. moving forward due to his difficult personality. The post-credit scene shows Agent Coulson going to New Mexico, where he sees a crater in the middle of which lies Thor's hammer. Let's start by talking about the film as a sequel. As I've discussed in the past, a sequel is a very different thing than an original one. A sequel carries more expectation, more desire from the audience to reclaim the feeling they had watching the previous. At the very least, this all applies to Iron Man 2. For being the third film of the MCU, where you have various characters to choose from, it's odd to me that they'd choose to make a sequel to the first, leading me to believe the purpose behind it was to expand upon Iron Man's story and give fans another look at the beloved character. In my opinion, the film fails at this for the most part. I think the main problem is that it feels like it has too much on its plate and can't give too much attention to any of them. I'll get into more specifics in a minute, but essentially Tony is facing repercussions for his recklessness. His ownership of the Iron Man suit is being questioned as other countries seek to replicate it. He claims that everyone is far behind him, but gets proven wrong when he is encountered by Ivan Vanko. This seems really interesting and is enhanced by the inclusion of Justin Hammer and Tony's impending death. This plot, I think, expertly expands upon the first film and is set up to be a worthy continuation of the story. However, from there are other plot lines that don't feel necessary to this main plot and take time away from expanding it. The film includes Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, and later expands into Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. Rhodes also gets a bigger role than in the first, which is nice to see, and him becoming War Machine is also cool to see, but again, it bloats the movie too much, I feel, and doesn't allow for the main story to be naturally expanded upon. There's also a plot about Tony's father, Howard Stark, but it's really forced if you ask me. Overall, I think it had the building blocks to be a great sequel, but becomes too obsessed with trying to include more and more, which leads me to the conclusion that it isn't really a great sequel. This plot could have been really interesting, this plot that could have been really interesting instead feels like a filler episode, with not really a point beyond being a chance to see the characters again, the fun of the filler notwithstanding. With that out of the way, let's dive into the title character himself, Iron Man. As mentioned, Tony's main plot really comes from facing the repercussions of his actions at the end of the first film, revealing to the world that he is Iron Man. Other countries and people are now trying to replicate his armor, which could quickly become a problem. Tony reassures everyone that everyone else is far behind his technology, but is proven wrong by one Ivan Vanko, who is able to replicate his miniature arc reactor. Tony later learns that it is because his father, Anton Vanko, worked with Tony's father, Howard Stark, but that the two had a falling out that left Howard wealthy and Anton in prison. On top of that, Tony's rival, Justin Hammer, is now supplying Vanko with more money that makes him even more dangerous. And to further make matters worse, the core in Tony's arc reactor is slowly poisoning and killing him, leading him to really think about the life he has left. This is all really interesting if you ask me. A bit of a rehash of the first film with Tony needing to change his ways, but it's different enough and tackles it in a new enough angle to warrant the story being told. However, with all of these additional plots, I feel like that's the extent to it we get. This leads to Tony's anxiety and depression not being fully wrapped up, and the villains not being able to make Tony struggle fully. Similarly, his relationship with Pepper is even more strange than in the previous, and despite Rhodes' increased relevancy, I feel like his and Tony's friendship is never fully explored. Furthermore, Tony's father is randomly thrown into the mix, and feels like a cheap way to conclude things. Tony's now deceased father, Howard Stark, randomly shows up when Tony is given a tape from Nick Fury, in which Howard reveals that he discovered a new element that he can't make due to limited resources, but he gives the blueprint to Tony, who creates said element. This element then coincidentally is able to stop Tony's suit from poisoning him, and now Tony can defeat the bad guys. It just feels lame. Instead of Tony learning something or overcoming an obstacle, he's just given the solution by his father, who figured out the answer to the problem years ago. Overall, I feel like they set up something really good here, but it just got fumbled by the end. Now seems like a good time to talk about the villains of the film, Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko / Whiplash. The two villains complement each other really well, with Hammer being humiliated by Tony Stark and Vanko looking to avenge his father. With Vanko's help, Hammer has the access to technology to one-up Tony, and with Hammer's help, Vanko has the resources to attack Tony. However, I feel like Vanko is more of a central villain than Hammer is. Hammer is a rather lackluster rival for Tony, is my main issue. Tony never gives him more than an eye roll, and there's never a moment where Hammer feels like he's an actual threat on his own. His defeat is also underwhelming, with Pepper simply getting him arrested for breaking Vanko out of prison, in the middle of the cruel final fight against Whiplash. Sam Rockwell gives a good performance for him nonetheless, and he is funny and charismatic from time to time, but as a villain, I don't think there's a whole lot to it, and he could have rather easily been written out of the film to focus on Whiplash. Speaking of whom, Ivan Vanko is a much superior villain if you ask me. His personal connection to Tony, while not groundbreaking by any means, leads to a much more interesting villain. Topped with his kind of goofy but also kind of cool Whiplash suit, which is much superior the first time around if you ask me, leads to a fairly entertaining villain for Tony to try and overcome. Also, the way that Howard Stark gets involved in this plot is actually much cooler than previously, because it further makes Tony think about whether or not his actions are good ones, as Vanko seeks justice for his father. I do wish they'd leaned harder into this though, because as is, Vanko is mostly a physical obstacle to overcome, rather than a mental one for Tony. Similar to Hammer, Vanko also has a really underwhelming defeat, with the final fight against his tech being much more entertaining, with Iron Man and War Machine defeating them as they come at them from every angle. But then Vanko shows up for a small portion, only for him to lift up his helmet for some reason, and be easily defeated because of that. And then he dies because he explodes all of his tech, but it's okay because Pepper was the only person near one, and Tony easily gets her away from the danger. Another disappointing defeat for another charismatic villain with a good performance by Mickey Rourke. Overall, the villains are serviceable enough, and even quite good from time to time, but they similarly suffer from not being able to be focused on. Finally, I wanted to go over the other characters in the film really quickly and talk about their roles in the film. Firstly, we have Pepper Potts, who is probably most put to the sidelines from the first film, as she doesn't have a whole lot else to do. It's odd because she is made CEO of Stark Industries for a vast majority of the film, and while we do get to see some of that, it's mostly how it relates to Tony, as it is another thing he does out of fear of his impending death. Similar to the first film, the relationship between Tony and Pepper is still really odd to me, and feels like an afterthought in the film. Rhodes is really cool to see as the War Machine, but I really wish we got to see more of him and Tony, as that would have been really cool. I think integrating Rhodes into the story more and making this more of an Iron Man and War Machine movie would have been really cool, but as is, it's a fine enough appearance. The switch in actors from Terrence Howard to Don Cheadle is pretty seamless, or as seamless as an actor switch can be anyways. Black Widow gets her first introduction into the MCU, and it's not half bad, seeing as how she is a spy. It's pretty interesting that her introduction is being undercover from not only the main characters, but the audience as well. She even gets her own fight scene too, which is cool, as she infiltrates Hammer's factory to reboot War Machine. Nick Fury is also here for a bit, but similar to the first film, he doesn't do a whole lot yet. He's mostly there for setup, but it's still nice to see him, I guess. It was also cool to see Agent Coulson again, despite how limited, and the post-credit scene with Thor's hammer is really cool. Happy Hogan gets a surprising amount of things to do, which is actually quite fun, with him trying to rush Tony his suit on the racetrack and assisting Natasha in infiltrating Hammer's factory, only to be able to take out a single guy. The incredibly minor character that is Christine shows up again and does absolutely nothing, for some reason. Yeah, that's about it. I don't think the side characters work nearly as well as they do in the first film. Whereas they felt more like side characters in that film, they can occasionally feel more like distractions in this one, or introduce a new plotline that doesn't go anywhere. Far from bad or anything, but not a whole lot impressive to mention. I give Iron Man 2 a 6 out of 10 for being a fine enough sequel to the first. Maybe I'll change my mind after watching future movies, but this one really seemed like a filler episode, without a whole lot of plot relevance. This is easily my least favorite of the 3 MCU films so far, as The Incredible Hulk had a story that at least flowed nicely together, but it could be a lot worse. There are elements that work here, and it is an entertaining enough time, with some pretty good jokes and moments sprinkled throughout. I was really hoping for this to be more of a Spider-Man 2, but unfortunately it's a lot more similar to Spider-Man 3, with simply too much going on that it distracts from the really good core of the film. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to share any opinions you had on the movie. A new episode releases each week, so stay tuned to see which film I cover next. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.